And when it comes to indie developers supporting each other, right now I feel like we're still in a lot of our infancy where that seems to be a logical thing for us to do with these small pockets of communities sharing technology or at least sharing knowledge about development because everyone's pretty much heads down. What's your perspective on that front? Like, do you see any of this really going on? I mean, my hopes are this is happening, but I feel like with this such a small team, right? Not anybody's really dedicated to this very important part of our industry.
Yeah, I mean, are you talking specifically about stuff like cross promoting and that kind of thing?
Cross promoting or just opportunities where I feel like when I go to these events, especially, right, I see that everyone seems to know everybody within the community, but it just doesn't match up to how there isn't enough cross promotion within the games themselves, or at least in promotion events. You know, there's nothing really going on with their.
Yeah, I mean that's very much games industry 101, isn't it? I mean, when we first got into it, it felt very cliquey, and it felt like we would go to events and everybody knows everybody except us, right? And I think that happens to a lot of developers, is that like they turn up and they feel like everybody's in like these friend groups and they're the only ones not in there. And so it does feel like that at times. I think I do see cross promotion happen, and I do see indies helping each other out. I don't think it happens enough. I don't think it happens as much as it should. The difficulty is it's on a case by case basis, and I also think it's on an individual basis, because you have to find a game and someone leading a games project that's actually nice. And you know, doesn't see you as a business rival or a threat, which they shouldn't really. But people can be funny like that. So it just comes down to really, do the people like each other, and if so, do they like each other enough to cross promote? I mean, for me, I wish people would do it more, because it doesn't hurt you in any way. You only gain from it on both sides, ultimately, because you tap somebody else's audience and they tap yours. And you know, you're not going to lose anybody from that. All you're going to do is gain. So it makes sense to you know, to do that more often. But yeah, I mean, I have seen it being done. I don't see it as much as I would like, but I think that's also down to the nature of games development, and everyone's heads down and not really focusing on anything else. And so it's almost a very internal process, an inward looking process. So you often find that the reason that people don't cross promote is because they haven't outreach to each other. So, you know, you don't ask if you don't get.
What suggestions, or at least ways that you've seen a successful cross promotion work? Is it mostly through social media, retweets, or is it something at least during conventions? Oh, how do you see a successful, hey, I like this game, you like mine, let's do something together partnership?
Sure. So I think there's two things that I've seen successful at. I think events and social media. Social media is the easiest to do. And I think it's always worth doing. But I've also seen, you know, a couple of developers who like each other's games group together to, you know, go to events, because events are very expensive. So they chip in and go together and share a booth. So that's one way that I've seen, you know, those are a couple of ways I've seen that. I think I would definitely like to see more creative cross promotion. So what I would like to see is maybe developers putting in characters from each other's games as a way to cross promote, or adding Easter eggs in from each other's games to, you know, do that kind of thing. I think that's more fun and inventive. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways that it can potentially be done. It's just about finding the right partner.
So the indie development base have been growing, scattered, but not quite together as a unit, but it has been growing. There's more, at least channels that we can put our games out there. It's making it easier for any individual to go out there with an idea to execute and fully go out there and put it out in the world. Vicarious PR firms are actually representing indie developers now, so it actually seems professional and not just one guy yelling it out the window to his neighbors, right? I'm seeing a lot of these transformative things happening within this niche industry. Where do you see it being in 5 years from now, with the new generation of consoles being more supportive and actually making it more of their public offering when they announce consoles? It's not just about AAA; it's about the indie titles too, as well. How do you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a strange one, right? I mean, indies have been fantastic in pushing the industry forward in innovation and showing what you can do on very little. The downside has been the sheer amount of indie games that launch, because I would say, if you look at Steam as a perfect example, the amount of games that launch on Steam every day is just becoming ridiculous. And of those, the majority of them are indies. And then of those, only maybe, 2 or 3 out of 15 or more are actually what I would consider quality indies. And so it's a very competitive marketplace. I think the issue that, to touch on your point about, using indies as a way to engage customers on platforms such as consoles, it's a fine line, because really, in terms of large promotional pushes that these companies are going to do, or any platform is going to do, it's going to have to be with a game that people like and is popular. And so inherently, if your game is not doing particularly well, then that offers really no value to you. I think, what's interesting to me is it ultimately comes down to what indies are looking for in terms of what they're creating and where they want to go. Because you'll often find, I usually, when I go to events and speak and stuff, you'll often meet 2 types of indie developers. You'll meet the indie developers who want to become games companies, or you'll meet indie developers who are just kind of following their own thing, and they're not really interested in commercial success. They're doing it more as a hobby. And the difference between the two is massive in terms of potential, but it's also massive in terms of game design and where you're going to take it, right? Because if you're just doing it as a hobby, then you can put out anything that you want to put out, even if it's not a particularly consumer-friendly game, and you can just sit there and just put it out and no big deal. But I often find that the indie developers who do want to be games companies and they want to do this long term and they want to make money out of this, they have some basic business principles that are missing in their business plans and their game design documents. That one of the mistakes that they make is they'll go with their vision, but not consider what the consumer wants. And that is a recipe for commercial disaster, because you have to consider what games people want to play when making a game that you want to sell. And I feel like as the industry matures, particularly the indie scene matures, I think you'll actually find that more and more indie developers who want to go that commercial success route start developing more games that have a lot more market research behind them. And so they'll start developing, you'll start to see trends within, like you see trends within the AAA marketplace, where like Battle Royale comes out, sells 6 million copies, then 4 more Battle Royales come out. I think you'll actually see a lot bigger trends within the indie market as well, as that industry begins to mature, because they'll try to focus more on making games that sell.